You know that feeling when you're looking at, say, cacti versus cactuses, and you just wonder which one sounds less wrong? Or maybe less like I'm trying too hard.
Oh, definitely. Or why foot does that whole vowel change thing to feet, but boot just gets an S?
Exactly. If you've ever felt like English plurals are just deliberately confusing, then you're in the right place.
Uh-huh.
Because that's exactly what we're digging into today. We've got some really interesting material here that explores why this seemingly basic part of grammar is such a historical, well, grab bag of weirdness.
Right.
So our mission for this deep dive is to try and untangle some of that confusion for you. Maybe even find a little bit of logic in the madness.
It's amazing, isn't it, how something so fundamental, something we use constantly, like making a noun plural, actually opens up this whole window onto the long and sometimes pretty messy history of English.
Yeah.
And as you'll see from the sources we looked at, what feels like just random mistakes or inconsistencies, they often have these roots going back, centuries.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Our sources suggest there are basically three big reasons why English plurals are all over the place.
Uh-huh.
The first one they talk about is Old English ghosts. Sounds a bit spooky. What are these linguistic spirits about?
It's fascinating, really. It's how echoes from, like, really old versions of English are still shaping how we talk now.
Yeah.
Take those ones you mentioned, mouse becoming mice, tooth to teeth. These are just random vowel swaps.
Right.
They're leftovers from a sound change called loud. It was common way back in Old English.
Oh, hello.
Yeah. Basically, a vowel in one part of the word changed its sound because of another vowel later in the word, even if that second vowel eventually disappeared.
Wow. So these plurals are like fossils.
Kind of, yeah. Fossils of an older grammar system.
Hmm.
So the key thing for you, the listeners, that these vowel changes, they're not just chaos, they're inherited. They come from a much older stage of the language.
So it's like some words are still following rules the rest of the language ditched ages ago.
Pretty much.
And then we've got words like oxen and children. That N ending, it feels really old. Is that another one of these ghosts?
Exactly. That N ending. It used to be a much more standard way to make plurals in Old English.
Mm.
But over time, it mostly just faded out. The ends ending kind of took over as the default.
Right, the standard way now.
But a few words like ox and child, they just stubbornly hung on to that older N form.
Yeah.
So for you, this just shows how language change isn't always neat and tidy.
Yeah.
Some words get sort of left behind, and that creates these little pockets of irregularity we still have to learn.
It's like the language came to a fork in the road and a few words went, nah, we'll stick to the old path and just never rejoin the main highway.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so that's one piece. The second reason for this plural puzzle, the sources say, is the arrival of the Latin and Greek invaders. Sounds dramatic.
It kind of was in a linguistic sense. So during the Renaissance, which for listeners was that period of rediscovering classical learning, scholars
Mhm.
really embraced Latin and Greek. And they often brought the grammar rules of those languages into English. That's why we sometimes get plurals like cactus becoming cacti or fungus to fungi. They're following Latin patterns.
Okay.
So the thing to grasp here is that these alternative plurals often signal a more maybe scholarly or formal origin.
Ah, so it was a bit like linguistics showing off, look at me, I know my Latin, so I'll use the proper plural.
There's probably an element of that, yeah.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for you. English didn't just fully adopt all these imported rules.
Bro.
We often anglicize them. We create perfectly fine alternatives using our good old S.
Oh.
The classic example, you probably know this one, is octopus.
Oh, yeah, octopuses. Octopi.
Exactly. Well, octopi looks like it follows a Latin pattern, though the word itself is actually Greek, just adopted into Latin. Most English speakers today overwhelmingly say octopuses.
Right.
And one of the sources you shared even dives into that whole debate among word nerds about the correct plural. It really highlights this inconsistency.
I can totally relate. I actually remember getting sort of gently corrected for saying octopi at a museum once. It felt a bit like I'd used the wrong secret password or something.
Exactly. And that little story perfectly shows how English kind of picks and chooses. Which foreign plurals do we keep as they are, and which ones do we just slap an S on?
Yeah.
It's a negotiation that's, well, still kind of happening.
Okay, so we've got Old English echoes and these sometimes awkward Latin and Greek borrowings. What's the third piece of this plural mess? The sources mention stubborn survivors.
Right. These are words that, for different reasons, often just keep the exact same form, whether they're singular or plural.
Like
Think sheep, deer, fish. The sources suggest maybe this is because they were historically important, like game animals, where maybe distinguishing one from many wasn't always the top priority in, say, a hunting situation.
Ah,
So
ah.
for you listening, these are the words where you generally have to rely on the context, the other words around them, to know if it's one or lots.
Like, they were too useful to bother changing form. And the sources also mention data and media. These feel like they're in a weird linguistic limbo. Originally plural, right? But we often use them as singular now.
That's a great point, and it's a perfect example of language evolving, like right now, for you to see.
Yeah.
Data is technically the plural of datum. Media is the plural of medium. But, like the sources say, we increasingly just use them with singular verbs, treat them as singular nouns,
Right.
especially, more informally.
The data shows, not the data show, usually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it brings up this interesting question for you to think about.
Yeah.
How much does the way we actually use language eventually override the sort of traditional grammar rules?
Good question. Okay, so it's this real linguistic stew, isn't it? Historical accidents, borrowed rules, giving us this really unpredictable landscape.
Yeah.
But our sources do try to impose some order. They outline 5 types of irregular plurals and even offer some hacks to help remember them. Let's try and crack this code, starting with the vowel changers.
Okay, so these are the ones we touched on. Inheriting that internal vowel shift from Old English, like man to man, goose to geese, foot to feet.
Right. And the hack here, which I thought was kind of neat, is to imagine the vowel sound sort of pulling upwards in your mouth. Like from the oo sound in foot, which is lower, to the higher e sound in feet.
Uh-huh.
That visual might actually help it stick for you.
Definitely. Little memory tricks like that can work wonders. Okay, next up are the end endings. One source amusingly called them the medieval crew.
Right, the child, children, and oxoxen type words. And the advice here seems pretty simple for you. Just learn them, because thankfully there aren't that many left.
Precisely. It's a pretty small, exclusive club,
Hmm.
so just straightforward memorization is probably the most efficient way for those.
Okay.
Then we get to the Latin Greek holdouts, like focus changing to foci or crisis to crises. Is there a pattern here you can grab onto?
Yes, the source points out a couple of common patterns. Words ending in ahas often change to itai, and words ending in ease often change to us.
Right.
So for you, spotting those endings can be a useful clue when you run into these types of words.
It's a handy rule of thumb to have, definitely. Although, as we saw with octopus, English doesn't always follow these borrowed rules, but
Yeah,
knowing the patterns gives you a head start.
got it. 4th category, same word, plurals. One source called these the minimalists.
Yeah. The sheep, aircraft, moose that just don't change.
And the trick here for you is context, right? Look for clues about quantity, like 3 heap obviously means plural.
Exactly. The words around it, the overall meaning, usually make it clear. Okay, finally, we have the total weirdos. The ones that seem to just defy any logic.
The rebels. Person becoming people, though as one source notes, persons does still pop up in very formal or legal writing.
True.
And die becoming dice, which, just to make it extra confusing for you, can sometimes be treated as singular now too, like roll the dice.
Right. It feels like these just have to be learned one by one. There's no real shortcut or pattern.
Yeah, seems like it.
They're the exceptions that really prove the lack of consistent rules. But one source does offer a useful pro tip for you. When you're really stuck, just adding an S is often your safest bet.
Really?
Yeah. It might not always be the textbook perfect answer, but people will almost certainly understand what you mean.
That's actually really comforting advice. It kind of acknowledges the messiness and gives you a practical fallback.
Well, and it reflects what language is really for, right? Communication. Often, just being clear is more important than sticking to some obscure old rule.
Good point.
Yeah.
Okay, now things get even more complicated because sometimes we have both a regular S plural and an irregular one, and both are technically correct. But maybe one sounds, I don't know, fancier or is used only in specific situations. Let's unpack these plural pairs for you.
Right. This is where things like style and social context creep in. The sources mention the classic cacti versus cactuses. Cacti is a more formal Latin one. Cactuses is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
More common in just everyday chat. Similarly, stigmata often have that specific religious connection, whereas stigmas is the more general plural we use for, social stigma.
Ah, I see.
So for you, choosing between them can depend on the situation, the audience, and maybe the impression you want to give.
It's like a subtle code embedded in the plural form itself. And then just to make it extra fun for you, there's the whole British versus American English thing.
Oh, absolutely. As your sources probably mentioned, formula is often preferred in British English, especially for maths, while formulas is pretty standard in the US.
Right.
And graffiti is interesting. Often treated as plural in the UK, the graffiti are,
Hmm.
but frequently used as a singular uncountable noun in the US, the graffiti is.
Huh. So the words have different personalities depending on which side of the pond they're on.
Kind of. And finally, the sources really stress how much context truly matters.
Crucial.
Absolutely crucial for you to get. Think appendices versus appendixes.
Okay.
Appendices usually refers to the extra bits at the end of a book. Appendixes usually means the anatomical organs.
Ah.
Got it.
Same idea with indices versus indexes. Indices pops up more in economics or maths. Indexes are those lists at the back of books. The same word can have different plurals depending on its specific meaning or the field it's used in.
It's like the word specialized. They branched out and got different plurals for their different job.
Exactly.
One of the sources you shared had a neat listener hack for this.
Mm-hmm.
Suggest maybe marking down these fancy or specific plurals in a notebook to remember when to use which. Seems practical for anyone wanting that extra precision.
It's a great way for you to actively engage with them, yeah. To build awareness of when cacti might be better than cactuses, for example.
Okay, so given all this, glorious chaos,
Mhm.
what are some concrete strategies you, our listener, can actually use to learn these irregulars without just throwing your hands up?
Well, the key thing highlighted in the sources is to try and break it down. Look for those patterns, even if they aren't perfect rules.
Grouping words helps. Make lists, mental lists, or actual lists of the vowel changers, the N words, the Latin Greek ones. It helps your brain kind of categorize them and find some order in the mess. That's the main thing for you.
That makes sense. Grouping things always makes random info feel less random. What else? Any other practical tips for you?
Using flashcards, singular on one side, plural on the other, is, a classic technique for a reason. It works for memorization.
Old school.
Yeah, the example in one source was one crisis, flip it over, two crises. Just that act of repeating and actively recalling the plural form really helps embed it in your memory. Great for you visual learners.
Definitely. And another idea I liked was actively spotting mistakes, like seeing a sentence the childs are playing and mentally, or actually, correcting it to children. That active correction really cements the right form for you.
Exactly. You're training your brain, your ear, to recognize the correct pattern by engaging with errors.
Hmm.
And they bring back that great pro tip for words like sheep and deer for you.
Just picture a farmer shrugging.
Yeah, it's just sheep.
Yeah.
That kind of silly visual can be surprisingly sticky for those same word plurals.
I love that image. It definitely sticks. Okay, now, to really put your new plural power to the test, the sources suggest a little plural detective challenge for you, the listener. Tell us about this fun assignment.
Yeah, the idea is just to get you actively noticing plurals out in the wild. So, first task, try and spot a less common, irregular plural sometime this week. Maybe you hear geese or read phenomena.
Okay.
And when you do, just try and think back, was that likely an Old English ghost or maybe a Latin or Greek invader? It just connects what we've talked about to the real world for you.
That's a cool way to be more mindful of language. What's the next detective step?
The second part is to maybe experiment a little with those double plurals. Try using both cacti and cactuses in conversation with a friend sometime. See if they even notice or if they have a preference. It's just a low-stakes way for you to explore how these forms actually land in everyday speech.
A fun little linguistic field test. And the final part of the challenge for you.
The last bit is just to get creative. Make up a totally silly, fake, irregular plural. Like one box, two becks. See if it makes you chuckle. See if it sticks in your head.
Apex.
It's just a playful reminder of how, well, kind of arbitrary plurals can sometimes feel. And one source even shared a story about a listener noticing criteria, technically plural, being used as singular all the time, which just shows how language keeps shifting under our feet.
It's so true. Once you start looking, you see these quirks everywhere. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the weird and wonderful world of English plurals, what's the main takeaway you want our listener to hold on to?
I think the biggest thing for you to remember is that this seeming chaos isn't really random. It's history. It's layers of Old English, Latin, Greek, all piled up over centuries.
Right.
Understanding those historical roots, even just a little, gives context to what otherwise feel like completely arbitrary rules.
Absolutely. And that advice to just focus on the common irregulars and kind of fake it till you make it with confidence for the rest,
Mm.
that feels really achievable. You don't need to memorize every single weird plural.
Exactly right. And hopefully, next time you hear someone say, maybe octopi, you'll have that little flicker of recognition about its Greek origins, even if you know octopuses is more standard now. It's just another little piece of the language puzzle you've now got a handle on.
Speaking of language puzzles, our next deep dive, we're tackling something that I know gets people talking and probably brings back some strong opinions from school grammar lessons. Why English seems to love double negatives, even though we're always told they're wrong.
Ooh, that'll be a good one.
It should be. So get ready for that. But for now, thanks for joining us on this journey through the perplexities of
A
plurals.
pleasure.
Until our next deep dive.